If Citroën in the late 1960s was well on its way to bankrupting itself in the pursuit of Parisienne, hedonistic grace and sophistication, in both the technical and stylistic aspects of its automobiles, and it was, rival Peugeot was in the exact opposite position. Rural and conservative, cautious even. The company's Victorian steel foundry roots no doubt influenced their ideals. And in that same steel foundry vein, they released a car in 1968, tough enough to take on the most inhospitable corners of the globe. Compared to the delicate, intricate cars of Citroën, Peugeot was building the Tonka toys of Franche-Comté in the post-war years. Where the former chased perfection in suspension to remove the bumps from the road, the latter just made sure the car was tough enough to withstand anything thrown at it. Like most of their European counterparts, the first cars back in production were pre-war offerings. In this case, the utilitarian little 202, followed swiftly by the monocoque-bodied 203, and in the late 50s by the 403 and then 404. All of this was evolution rather than revolution, but quite importantly, the 403 marked the beginning of Pininfarina styling, a partnership which would endure 50 years at Peugeot. The deft, understated Italian lines were just the thing to draw these cars into the mid-century, without losing that steelwork steadiness which spelled rugged dependability. In 1963, work began on what would be the 404's successor, a new, large family car for a France with a growing middle class and a shrinking colonial empire. Both, as it happens, large consumers of Peugeot's offerings. The internal design team and Pininfarina both produced designs for the new car in competition. Pininfarina's first offering looks a lot like the smaller 204 from the front, but the rear of the car already has that distinctive drooping boot lid, and the passenger cell shape wouldn't be much changed on the production model. The internal team, led by Paul Bouveau, came back with a design that looked a lot like the old 404 in terms of body shape, but with one of the most distinctive features which would eventually make it to the production car: Sophia Loren's eyes. If you think that sounds a bit out there for stodgy old Peugeot, you'd be right. They knew things would have to be a bit closer to revolution than previous offerings. The changes would ring true on the technical side of things too. In were crumple zones, independent trailing arm rear suspension, four-wheel disc brakes and a safety windscreen. Nothing too radical, however. Up front were the tried and true McPherson struts. Conventional longitudinal engines with rear-wheel drive, none of this Citroën nonsense with front drive. Petrol offerings were the overhead valve XM and XN in either carburetted or Kugelfischer injection guise, a 1.8 and a 2 litre respectively. Diesel power came in the form of the XD series, a 2, 2.1 or 2.3 litres. All of this mated to a 4 or 5 speed manual or a ZF 3-speed auto. By early 1968, the 504 was ready, but France wasn't quite. The May 68 social unrest brought strikes even in provincial Peugeot's factories, and the launch was postponed to September of that year. Resounding success? Not quite. There were mixed feelings about Pininfarina's droopy boot lid. The judges of the European Car of the Year competition had no such reservations, and crowned it winner for 1969, beating a host of very capable competitors, including the BMW New 6s and the Jaguar New XJ6. Peugeot themselves gave it their own conservative vote of confidence and kept the 404 in production alongside it for the next 7 years, just in case. In 1969, a Pininfarina penned and very elegant two-door coupe and cabriolet were presented. This car bears only a passing resemblance to the saloon. Even Sophia's eyes are gone. The car got the fuel-injected 2 litre and eventually the 2.6 litre PRV6 engine. Perhaps unfairly called a commoner in an evening dress, this competitor to Citroën's SM might not have been able to match the Maserati Prestige, for all the good it did the SM, but it proved no less tough than its 504 saloon stablemates, going on to win the 1978 East African Safari Rally. In 1970, the brake or estate car was introduced. The design modifications from the saloon were done in-house rather than by Farina. I think it would be unfair to say it shows, so I'll add that it's no less charming for it. The brake actually does away with the independent rear suspension in favour of a live rear axle. This is to deal with the extra weight these cars may have to carry. When Mercedes was faced with this problem in the W123, they added a relatively complex hydropneumatic self-leveling system with an engine-driven pump and a fluid reservoir that could detect weight in the rear end hydraulically. Peugeot just added an extra coil spring. In 1979, with the retirement of the 404, a pickup-shaped gap in the lineup was plugged by the 504 pickup. This was also designed in-house, and would remain in European production until 1993, long after the rest of the range left the market there. The conversion from monocoque to a ladder frame to accommodate the pickup bed had taken some time, and leaf spring suspension was used in the rear. The pickup was offered with the 404's 1.6 litre petrol engine in addition to the diesel range. The 504 was built tough, and the long travel suspension made it especially comfortable over rough terrain. Its torque tube drive shaft was very resilient against torque reactions. Over 3 million cars were produced in Europe alone, but the car was also produced globally through various licensing agreements and CKD, or complete knockdown kits, which would be assembled locally. The car was produced in Argentina until 1999, China until 1997, Kenya until 2004, Nigeria till 2006, South Africa until 1985, Spain until 1980, and Taiwan until 1984. The car was truly global and found favour in much of Africa, Asia and South America, where roads were poor or non-existent. The 504 has been called the King of Africa, and was in many cases the first internal combustion vehicle to get to remote areas, ahead of conventional 4x4s. There are many stories of these cars putting even Land Cruisers to shame over rough terrain. The taxis of much of Western Africa and places like Cairo are today still often 504s with moon mileages of them, still plying their trade over the same rough terrain. Of course, now a new Land Cruiser would be ideal, but still financially out of reach for your average cab driver in Mali. Thankfully, he doesn't need one. The 504 still makes the journey. Now, what if you really did want to take the fight to the 4x4s? Well, in 1980, Henri d'Angel began performing four-wheel drive conversions to 504 brakes and pickups. A ladder frame chassis was fitted to the brake. The car was raised 185mm at the front and 160 at the rear. The rear axle from the larger 604 was used to provide the front axle on the d'Angel. Front suspension was reinforced with a double wishbone. Front brake discs were enlarged and the cars came on off-road tyres, but otherwise remained mostly unchanged. These were aimed at everything from the dunes of Sahara to farmers, and even found some favour in motorsport. Maggie Thatcher's son Mark famously got lost in a 504 d'Angel during the 1982 Paris-Dakar rally, along with his co-driver Annie-Charlotte Vernet and their mechanic Jackie Garnier. The pickup went through similar modifications, and also saw some Dakar rally action. The vast majority of d'Angel 504s ended up in official use, either with the gendarmerie or the French colonial authorities or the French army, where they saw service, for example, in Lebanon during peacekeeping operations. Today they are sought after but very rare. It's a good job then that the two-wheel drive cars are just as tough and almost as good off-road.